For our next team preview video, we need to take a little trip to a hitherto unvisited island. The island of Sandoy is named after the sandy soil found there, and it is the only island where you'll find dunes. I mean in the Faroe Islands, not just anywhere. Anyway, it is the 5th largest in the Faroe Islands, slightly bigger than Borøy, the island where we find Klaksvík, but with a fraction of the population, housing just over 1,000 people and just under 7,000 sheep. And it's also the home of one of the most remarkable football clubs. This is Faroe Ball, and this is B71 Sandoy. We know B36 and B68, and we now have B71 to think about, and as much as I'd love for there to be a world where there was once 71 teams all starting with B and only the strongest survive, it's simply a shorthand for, say it with me now, Boltverleg, Ball Club 1971. Although, to be pedantic, their actual full name is Sandoy Otrotefella B71, so you may see their shorthand name as Sandoy on some sites. Like the others, they're named after the year they were formed, but technically they weren't formed in 1971, their true birth was 1 year earlier in 1970. But we actually need to go back even further. In the 1960s, two of the villages on the island of Sandoy, namely Sander and Skopun, started to play regular football matches against each other. Now there was something about these games that felt unofficial and amateurish. Maybe it was the sand surface they played on, maybe it was the fact they picked players randomly before the game, or maybe it was the fact they used rocks for goalposts. I'm not slating this. I'm sure most of you will have used jumpers for goalposts in the park as kids, and really, when all things are considered, rocks and jumpers very interchangeable. Anyway, professional these games were not, but what they definitely were was popular, and they drew in crowds of excited locals eager to get one over their neighbouring village. While they were kicking up sand lumps and stubbing their toes on the piles of posts, at the same time a school was being built between the two villages, with a sports field on site. This got some locals excited for the prospect of forming an actual team to represent the whole island, if the school would provide them with the playing surface. And so, on the 1st of January 1970, a sports team was established to play on the field, and it was called Sand, because the only players picked were from the village of Sander. But as more people from the other villages wanted to play as well, they opened it up further and renamed the club B71 Sandoy. They're the only team in the country to play in yellow and blue, and their simple crest has remained unchanged since their formation. B71 are based on the island of Sandoy, which is here. We've already discussed the two biggest villages, Sander and Skopun, but there are a handful of other settlements, namely Skarlavik, Husavik, Dala and Skarvanes, for a population of 1,231 humans and 6,878 sheep at last count. The club still play at the location of the old school field between the two main towns. In 2024, a brand new 11-kilometre super tunnel opened, which essentially linked the club directly to the larger island, as the opening to the tunnel is just down the road from the club's Inni Idal stadium. This takes you to Kirkjubø at the southern tip of Streymoy and replaces the ferry that opened there previously. With the construction of this tunnel and the one in 2020 that linked Tórshavn to Toftir, the journey time for B71 to away games has reduced dramatically. A few years ago, a trip to B68 Toftir would have meant a half-hour ferry from Sandoy to Kirkjubø, and then a 75-kilometre drive round the coast, resulting in a journey time of around 2 hours. Thanks to the tunnels, the whole trip has been reduced to 45 minutes. At the start of the 1980s, B71 had some talented young players on their books, and after years of third-tier mediocrity, they had accidentally founded themselves a golden generation, including Eli Hense, Torbjorn Jensen and the Clementson brothers, Rowan and Johan. They played the youngsters in the first team and got their first piece of silverware in 1986, the 3rd Division trophy. This was an achievement in itself, but the hunger didn't abate, and 2 years later they won the 2nd Division trophy and suddenly found themselves in the top flight with the big boys. We've talked before about how teams can struggle in the big league, sometimes scoring no points, NSOI, sometimes winning a handful of games and generally being blown away by the stormy weathers of the top division. But B71 brought their own storm with them, a sandstorm if you will, and their new manager, Jan Kaczynski, brought in experienced players from the top flight of his native Poland. B71 feared nobody with their golden generation and extra class of players. HB, B36 and Klaksvik all came to Sandoy and went away beaten or at a stalemate. B71 not only won the league in their debut season, they did it undefeated. Going up to the top flight and winning the league undefeated, it's a sporting miracle. The tiny team who played in the basement division 3 years earlier had rocketed to the top of the table and pulled off one of, if not the greatest upset in Faroese history. Unfortunately, B71 hold a record which is considered unique in world football. They won the league unbeaten in their debut and then got relegated the year after. They did bounce back a little bit, and in 1993 they beat HB in the Faroe Islands Cup to win the trophy for the first and so far only time. They haven't played in the top flight since 2011, winning just 3 games that year and tumbling down the leagues, but in each of the last 4 seasons they finished in the top half of the second tier, trying to build for a long overdue return. B71 have recruited managers from all over the place in the last decade or so, with no less than 7 nationalities in the dugout. Alan Morkor, Piotr Krakowski, Bakary Boyang, Stefan Hansen, Heither Bernard Torleifsen, Christopher Harrington and Richard Goff have all taken charge. Former Aldershot Town under-12s coach Richard Goff was one of the longest serving, taking charge for 5 seasons until 2025, but last season he was replaced with former Lyngby under-19 manager Niklas Gersted, who guided the club to 3rd, narrowly missing out on promotion again. In 2022, B71 missed out on promotion to the top flight on goal difference, ending the season tied with TB on 52 points. This season might be B71's best chance in years at going back up. From the basement to the top and back again, all in a few chaotic years, in a story still told in Faroese football. B71 Sandoy definitely left their mark on Faroese top flight and definitely have the firepower to do it all again. Come back someday, whenever, for the next team we look at, FC Hoyvik. And until then, tack for watching, see you next time.